Welcome. We're here today with Dr. Bernadette Ardelli. She is the Vice President of Research and Graduate Studies here at BU and is an accomplished researcher and educator and administrator. And her background is in science. So she has a bachelor's in biology from Cape Breton and then a Master of Science and PhD in zoology from Guelph. And she was a senior researcher and postdoc at McGill and then has been here at BU. Is it 17 years?
I'm celebrating my 18th.
18 years.
Yes.
Okay. And so during that time, she's brought in grants from NSERC, Canada Foundation for Innovation, Manitoba Health Research Council, Manitoba Research and Innovation Fund, and I could go on because there are more. But during that time, she's lifted up our institution and has also been a strong advocate for lifting up women and girls in science. And so we'll hear a little bit more about that as we talk. And we'll also hear a bit about your research, which I'm excited about because it's all the way from like fish to sharks and humans. Mm-hmm. And so it's pretty broad, I would say. And so I'm excited to hear more about it. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Oh, thank you. So Women's History Month is every year in October. And the theme this year is Women at Work. And they have a subtitle of Economic Growth, Past, Present, and Future. And so the goal is to highlight the significant contributions that women are making to Canada in the form of work, both historically and present and ongoing. So based on the theme of Women's History Month, and based on your background as someone who champions women and girls in science, I thought we'd kind of start just with a broad look at what you might think of as the challenges facing women and girls in your field. And it could be as they're heading into their careers. So we probably see more of that in post-secondary. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure the challenges don't just disappear once they graduate. So it could also be throughout the career. So I'll just launch that over to you and love to hear what you think.
Challenges. I think the first is getting women into science careers, into the natural sciences. It's historically been a difficult discipline to get women engaged in. Mm-hmm. I'm not really sure why. I suspect maybe it goes back to when they're in school, because we know if a girl isn't interested in going into the sciences by the time they enter grade 9, you've lost them. And so we really need to do more as they're going through the school system. And so then challenges once you get into science, well, very few women. When I was going through my science degrees, especially the graduate degrees, the master's level, there were, it wasn't roughly 50-50, but there were some women at that level. But by the time I got to my doctorate, there were only 3 women, including myself, in the doctoral program. And so the challenge when you get in is having that peer support system to keep you in. And it was very hard because the other 2 women were mothers, they had families. And so when they weren't, doing their research, they were off taking care of their family. So, and it's really important to have that peer support system because, yes, it's not always welcoming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is some shameless self-promotion at this point because I'm here with the hat of the co-chair of SWORC, which is the Status of Women Review Committee. Mm-hmm. And so we've had a kind of mentoring program for the last however many years that SWORC has been around. But I think that program will be continuing as we transition into becoming the Equity Review Committee. So if there are people listening to this who are new to an institution and wanting to build some of that community that you're mentioning that is so critical, I think that's a really great place to start. That's partly why I joined SWORC in the first place. Mm-hmm. The person reaching out to me said, this is a great group of women and they're doing wonderful things on campus. And so that was my motivation for joining. And then now I'm still here. But I think it is really critical that we have that community.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah. Do you think it goes all the way across, like from post-secondary into the career as well? Or do you think that it's more just in the post-secondary?
I would say in the career as well. I would like to say, if you look at my career at BU, because yes, I did my degrees and it wasn't easy. And then as I'm progressing through my career, you need that support as well. And again, where you don't have a lot of women, it's hard to make that connection. There's a sociologist, I think she's now at UBC, but she wrote this article. It was coined the crazy bitch narrative. And it just talks about how women get stereotyped once they're in academics. And so if you display stereotypical male qualities, you're decisive, you excel, or, then you get excluded. You deal with what I call the silent resistance, where, or if you're more friendly, you sort of downplay your achievements, you fit in better, then you seem to be able to have more acceptance within academics. And so, it was hard. I mean, I was here 8 years before I had an honor student work with me, 8 years. So I was just, my funding, I was just hiring people outside of the university. It was really hard to get those students to come into the lab.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost a double-edged sword, hey?
Yep.
Like if you promote yourself and your research, then because of your gender, it's viewed a certain way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in the face of some of these challenges, not so much the community building, although maybe it does that too, you created a pretty amazing initiative, the STEMinista Convention. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that? Well,
I can't take the full credit for it. I got this idea years ago. I can't remember how many years now, but it was for International Day of the Girl. And so I was invited with a few other researchers from BU to go to the legislature, and we talked about our research to a group of young women. So they selected, I think there was about 35 girls from all over Manitoba to come to the legislature and to, learn and talk to us. And then that event was hosted by a Canada Research Chair. And then we went to the University of Manitoba, where we all got together. It was just all women talking to other women. And I thought that was really important that we had those young girls seeing these established women in science, because it was about science and engineering. And so many years ago, I got involved with the science fair, and I felt like we needed to do more than just, we do things that we call the Science Olympics, but I wanted to do something a little bit more because I just saw that there weren't as many girls as I would have liked at the upper years in participating in the science fair. Usually, up to grade 5, there's a lot of girls, but then they start to peter off. And so I wanted to do this initiative where I could bring some of these girls together who were at the science fair. And so just to see that, if you keep going, if you're interested, here's what you could do. And so the first year I did it, I sent out a call for women in my faculty in science, and also to get some students to come and talk and be mentors. And so they talked about themselves and their programs, what they were interested in, where they were going. And then it kind of evolved to where we started to talk about stereotypes. And they're in a safe space, and they can talk about that. And I really thought things would be different. I really thought. And so we had these focus groups being led by, again, young university students that identified as female. And it hasn't changed. It's just like, it was shocking to me that they're still hearing things like boys are better at math. better at science. If a girl gets a good mark, it's because she looked at someone else's paper. It's just, and then just you just comments about how you should look. Like the physical appearance was a big one because I probably spend, the night before, I have to think about what I'm doing the next day. So I have to pick the right thing because I know I'm going to be judged. And is it appropriate? Is there going to be a comment? You agonize over how you look, and they're still going through that. Yes, they wrote down all of these stereotypes. We gave them all little cards. It was anonymous, and they wrote these things down, and it's like, wow. And boys just, saying inappropriate things, and then their teachers, well, just because he likes you. Whew.
That's so discouraging.
It is. But that was discouraging to hear that. But because we've kept this thing going every year, I'm now actually seeing some of those girls from that STEMinist convention coming to BU, and they remember. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. So it really is building some relationship and community if you're following the same people through.
And what I've learned with EDI work, you can't stop ever. Because you're never going to solve the problem. And if you stop paying attention to it, things will just start to slide back to the way it was. So you have to just keep going and pushing. And so last year we had different students and faculty. We made a video. So they talked about, what they how they get into science, any sort of issues that they may have had along the way, because it's important that these young women also be able to identify with one of these individuals. So we had people talk about overcoming a disability, not being able to afford going to university, so taking student loans and different things like that. So, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Not amazing that they're still experiencing those kinds of stereotypes, but amazing in the face of that, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And we're getting more buy-in and also more participation because they're getting used to this. And so every year they're coming back and we're talking about more and more. So then it's like last year it was, okay, here's some of the things that were brought up the year before. What do you think we can do to try and maybe stop this or change it, or I don't know if we'll ever solve it, but at least, and so we sort of talked about it at their level, because I tell them, like, I'm old,
older than them.
older. And so, I went into that, the last STEMinist convention, we were going to be talking about wicked problems. And I wanted to know what was the most wicked problem. And I was convinced it was going to be climate change. It was stereotypes. For them, it was stereotypes. Oh. So,
wow.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's impacted by social media and by the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your own research too.
My own research. Yeah. Sure. So my research has always been about control of infectious disease, and the diseases that I have focused on have been diseases of poor and marginalized populations. So the particular group of diseases that I was interested in, they impact 80% of the world's population, but receive 10% of global health funding, because the bulk of these fall in Africa and other poorer nations. So in terms of control, I believe in vaccines. I know that they save lives and they have changed the course of human history when you have a good vaccine. And so that was always my approach of vaccine development. Vaccines are, if you can get a good vaccine, you can get a lifetime of protection. but they're not easy to make. And so it takes a lot of work and time to get that vaccine available, particularly for the populations that we were wanting to help. So then I started looking at what I would call Band-Aid solutions. Okay, this vaccine is going to take a long time, but we need help here and now, which is where I got into looking at drugs. So I did some work, like a lot of drug companies have compounds that they've shelved because, it doesn't work or it's not going to make the money. And so trying to get access to those, what we would call orphan drugs. And so trying to test some of them, but also making some alternative therapies, because for this particular group of diseases, the drugs have been around since maybe the 1920s. So they're very old, but more importantly, because of the age of these drugs and when they came into being used, they're actually pretty toxic, and you would never be able to use those types of drugs today. Like you would never get it passed, but it's all that there is. So looking at ways to try and reduce toxicity. And of course, if you're reliant on a drug, eventually you will get drug resistance, which is where I kind of got into looking at drug resistance as well. So could we find a different drug? Because, drugs they're really good and they work well, but there's just a lot of issues with them. And again, because of the populations that are being impacted, people aren't particularly interested in developing drugs for these countries. So it's typically scientists who are trying to do the work and create a therapy. So that's kind of my role with infectious disease. I know at Guelph I did work with fish, but because the disease I was working on was so dangerous and because there was resistance to every drug, I couldn't risk getting infected because I wouldn't be treated. Yeah. So I used this fish model, same type of parasite, and it couldn't infect humans. Okay. So I could do a lot more safe work working with the fish.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yep.
That was, I think, one of the best everyday language explanations of a very complex topic. I was a little worried about that heading into this interview.
Well, I didn't get into the names of all of the receptors.
I noticed that. I appreciated it. I was reading some of your articles that you've published, and I was like, I don't understand the title. We'll see how this interview goes. But I really followed that and could see the connections through, how you got from one thing to another. And that made total sense. Thank you so much for explaining it in an accessible way.
Yep.
Yeah. So having studied infectious diseases and then having just recently lived through a pandemic, how was it being someone who understands all the science behind what's going on?
For me, it was helpful probably from a professional and a personal level, just because I understood. I have my son was, 7 at the time. And just to try and explain to him about vaccines and why they are safe, and just trying to explain to people, because there was a lot of, especially with the COVID vaccines, it's going to change my DNA, and so just really trying to explain to people that that's not actually what's going to happen, and these types of vaccines have actually been around a really long time. You just don't know about it because we haven't had a global pandemic where we needed to have these vaccines available. I was a little surprised because just at the beginning, because I was in Toronto, Montreal when SARS hit. Okay, yeah. And so I remember the impact of SARS, and I thought, it's another coronavirus. But it didn't quite play out that way. But, as time went on, it's, so I think it helped to talk to people and say, yes, the vaccines are safe. Yes, there's always going to be some side effects because when you make these therapies, you're aiming for, 90% or better will be okay. But, we're all unique. And so there will be some people where there are going to be some side effects. But the disease is so much worse. Yeah. The disease is so much worse. Yeah. And so that's how I get my son to get his shots. I'm like, yeah, you felt a little sore, but can you imagine if you actually got this infection? Yeah. Because, vaccines don't protect against infection. They protect against the severity of disease. Mm-hmm. So if you keep getting them, you should have very few symptoms. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yes, so it was interesting watching it. I went back and read a few books that I haven't read in a long time about the 1918 pandemic and sort of all of the different things that happened as a result of the 1918 pandemic, good things. Public Health Agency of Canada, our universal healthcare system, the Winnipeg General Strike, which brought about a lot of changes to healthcare and to working conditions. And so I'm waiting to see what's going to be the result of our pandemic. But certainly just watching how people had to get creative and think about ways to be together and talk and
yeah. Mm-hmm. I wonder if it'll be something related to needing clean air in places. Like we now wash our hands and know about clean water.
And
it'll be clean air.
Wearing a mask is perfectly acceptable. I've been to South Korea many times, and masks are put a mask on if you're feeling unwell.
Yeah. Do you feel like people respected your knowledge on this topic, or do you feel like because of your gender it was viewed a different way, or are you at the point of your career where you don't face that anymore?
Oh, it depends on who we were speaking to. So people who know me listen to me, but you're always going to get pushback. And I also find just because there was so much anxiety and such a like a lack of control over what was happening, that I just felt like there was just arguing and pushing back. And I'm just like, well, I'm doing what I think is right in terms of, keeping people safe. Mm-hmm. And I'm getting vaccines, and I'm letting people know that I'm getting these vaccines. Mm-hmm. But, for some people, it's talk to your doctor. That's the person who's going to give you the best advice for you. Yeah. But there was, there were some meetings where it was just constant arguing, and it's like, but I get it. Mm-hmm. It's just everyone's anxiety is just coming out, and
it's not so much about you or your gender. It's maybe where they're coming from and what they're experiencing.
But I would say certainly my gender did play a role, because there is a tendency to dump more on women, to treat you like maybe the mom or, So I had a lot more people telling me things I really didn't want to know, but because I had to point out to people, there's a bit of, I would say, a dehumanizing aspect when I find a female leader, and just to get people to understand that you're not the only one going through this. Like, I'm doing my job as dean, but I also have a child who's in school. Like, I'm also being impacted by all of this. So,
Yeah. We had someone on the same series for Women's History Month, but last year, who had done research on the types of care needed during the pandemic for women academics. It was fascinating and exactly what you're describing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So going back to your research, I can see a strong kind of equity thread sort of throughout. And I'm curious how you got interested in that, or, why did you decide to study diseases in countries that are, maybe they have less access or less funding?
I think it's probably because of a course that I took in undergrad. It was being taught by a woman, and she talked about these infections, and they were just so interesting. And then I ended up going to Guelph to grad school, and so I think that's just where it it started. And I think probably where I grew up on the East Coast, where we've experienced a lot of inequities with employment, with access to healthcare. My family doctor retired and he had over 6,000 patients. And so trying to get I get the inequities in healthcare. I have a family member whose life would have been very, very different if they had had access to health care, because they were born before we had our universal health care system. So to be able to afford that type of health care was just not possible for my family. And so their life would have been very different, very different.
Thanks for sharing that. I think we'll kind of come back around to the women and girls.
Okay.
And so I wonder if you had a chance to give advice to women and girls who are interested in science at any stage, what might you say to them? And then also if you have advice for parents, caregivers, or teachers.
So it sounds easy, but it's not, because I would just say, be yourself. Don't let anyone dissuade you from doing what you want to do. But that's hard if you don't have that support network. So I don't know why I ended up in science, because I didn't have that support network going through school. I was interested in science. I certainly didn't have a lot of teachers pushing me to go one way or another. It's just that was something that interested me. I'm the first person in my family to ever go to university, so I didn't sort of even have that perspective of, go this way, go that way, take this route. So I know it's easy to say don't let anyone dissuade you, but there will be people who try to do that. And of course, especially when you're at that sort of, that young girl age where you can feel insecure, where you can, especially these days, I don't know how these young girls with all of the social media can actually, develop any kind of confidence. But it's important to not let anyone dissuade you, but also just get a group of other girls. Just have that collective, that supportive group. It doesn't have to be a lot, but just to have a few people that you can talk to and rely on. So that's what I would say. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't do something. If that's what you want to do, then you should do it. And then, of course, if you feel like someone's standing in your way, then talk to someone about that person standing in your way. If it's a teacher, gosh, I hope not. But if it's a teacher, talk to your parents about this teacher, or talk to someone within the school system. But as far as teachers, I think that it's really important to be careful what you say. Like when you're teaching, if it's a science class, don't talk about boys are better than girls, or boys are better at math than girls. Just try to be aware of those types of biases that might come out, and just be careful about the language that you use. I would really strongly encourage, I know post-COVID, a lot of schools are still getting back into having their science fairs, but have a science fair, and just really encourage people. Yep. Not just encouraging the girls, but encouraging the boys, why it's important to support girls. Sometimes my father would say things, or let my brother get away with things. And I'm like, they're someone's daughter too. We're all someone's daughter. So think about it from that perspective. How would you want your daughter to be treated?
Oh, thank you very much for sharing and for coming on the podcast. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Well, we did talk a bit about my shark research.
Yes, I want to hear about it.
Well, that's my dream coming full circle, because I've always been, I grew up on an island, so surrounded by the ocean. So ocean life was always of great interest to me. And when I went, and I was thinking about, finishing up my undergrad degree, what do you want to do? It's like, I want to be a marine biologist. I want to study sharks. Then I got told, no one's going to pay you to do that. And I'm like, really? But so I went to the University of Guelph because they had what's called the Institute of Ichthyology. Ichthyology is the study of fishes. And so they had people on staff who were like sharks. So I'm like, I'm going there. And I was wandering this parking lot. I had just started at the University of Guelph, and this gentleman stopped me, and he's like, "You're lost." And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "What are you looking for?" I'm like, "I'm looking for the Institute of Ichthyology." And then he started laughing, and he said, "It actually doesn't have a physical structure. It's just a collection of people."
Yeah.
But we started to talk, and Dr. Crawford, who is now Dr. Crawford, he came to Guelph for the exact same reasons, to do work on great white sharks. So 30 years later, I was looking for a book because my son was learning how to read, and I wanted him to read the very first book I learned to read in 1975, and it was about this woman named Eugenie Clark, and she was known as the Shark Lady, Dr. Eugenie Clark. And I'm like, this book, I can't find it. I know it exists because I remember reading it to my grade primary teacher, Mrs. Windsor, and getting scored on my reading. So I ended up reaching out because this guy was friends with her. And it's like, yeah, that book exists. And so we just started talking again. And so now we're doing this work on Atlantic great white sharks and trying to figure out where they're mating and their mating behavior because it's never been observed ever.
Really?
Yeah. So, but what the work we're doing, it's not based on peer-reviewed articles or scientists. We're talking to surfers, we're talking to fishermen, and everyone, oh yeah, they're here, they're there. Yeah, they've always been here. It's not a big deal because they see them all the time, but it's very different when you go into those more traditional knowledge keepers as opposed to looking to the government scientists and those types of things that might appear in the peer-reviewed literature. So it's really fun. So I've kind of come full circle.
That's amazing. And what a fortuitous, bumping into somebody that's turned into this whole thing.
Yep.
Amazing. I love hearing stories like that of how, you started out in this place and then it kind of came this whole...
And all because Steve saw me lost and thought he'd help me out.
Yeah. You never know what's going to happen when you bump into someone on campus.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Well, I wish you great luck with your great white shark study.
Thank you.
Does it have a name yet, the study, or is it just the great white shark study?
Well, we're doing a few different things. So we're looking at many aspects of great white shark biology, but we've actually got a consortium of volunteers who have joined this network.
Okay.
And so we're looking at making our beaches shark smart.
Okay.
Because along the Atlantic coast. So if you're looking at New Jersey, where you do have these sharks, they have Shark Smart. So here's what you do. Here's how you behave, just to make people more aware. And then we have a number of the community colleges who with their, they have programs where they use drones and they're out filming and collecting some footage. And so we're seeing things that you would never have seen if you're in the water with them. But when you're just silently observing, some really interesting things have come out. Things we didn't think about sharks at all. They're sort of portrayed as these cold, calculating creatures, but we're actually seeing that the mothers do take care of their young and they teach them how to hunt. And
Isn't that amazing how we kind of think about animals? Like dolphins are playful and do all these things, and sharks are not playful, at least in my mind, but maybe they will be. Who knows? Oh, that's fascinating. I can't wait to learn more.
Well, we're going into their environment, so what do you expect?
Yeah, it can't be stoic all the time.
If they came into our environment, we'd probably have a problem with it.
We would probably, not be playing shark game. Well, thank you for coming on the show. And this has been really fascinating to hear more about it. And so thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks very much.